Okay, hi guys. Let's continue with the next video on visualization this time. I think almost all of you already submitted the visual summary, which was really great. And in the meantime, I also learned that obviously when I put something on the Moodle platform, especially like tasks and deadlines, it seems that you are not automatically getting any deadlines. So yeah, next time I will also add additionally an announcement so you all get an email so you will be better informed. But please don't worry about this deadline for the visual summary. For those very few of you who did not do it yet, you just still can do it and just send it to me, and that's totally fine. And I think next time I know better how to handle it with the announcement. Yeah, so in this video I would like to talk about the aspect or the very important issue of visualization in PIA. So let me just get started with the presentation. So the question of this short video will be, why is visualization important for participatory research? And at the end, we will also talk a little bit about the differences between visual and verbal modes of doing research. So yeah, it was really great seeing all your visual summaries. I did not talk about visualization beforehand because I just wanted to drop you into this task, into the cold water, because I think it really shows also partly the potential of visualization. On the one hand, I think it's important that we kind of get reused to it, to draw and visualize some stuff, because we don't do it very often in research. And as some of you also indicated in your visual summaries, that somehow it also seems not to be that scientific. I will come to that in a bit. Yeah, and at the same time, now I will go through some of these visual summaries and try to interpret them, which is in itself a very important part of participatory approaches. So especially those of you who did then these different visualizations can kind of cross-check how good I was, or maybe I didn't get all the elements. I will do that, like, not with all of your inputs, but with some of them, because I think altogether we really found a very good list of advantages and disadvantages of visualization, yeah, which we all can take away. So let's get just started with the first one, the visual abstract from Sarah. And Sarah, you pointed out actually what most of the visual abstract pointed out, in particular this combination of simplicity versus complexity. Yeah, so through visual visualizations, we can draw something very simplistic, but at the same time say a lot. Yeah? We have some information here on the one side, and then we draw it, and it totally goes into our brain. But the challenge can be also if we have a lot of information, to bring that into pictures, and which in itself, that's how I interpret your aspect of time here, which is a very important aspect indeed. Yeah, and then how to bring all this information into visualization, or even a lot of visualizations can lead to an exploding brain stress, you were noting here. Yeah, which is really important. That was too quick. Yeah, so I think most of you kind of pointed that out right away. Alex, you were drawing this picture starting with the pros and then ending with the con. I read this picture like this. So that through visualization, we can actually combine a lot of kind of complex relations, complex content and relation, and make it understandable. So make complexity understandable. And on the con side, yeah, you have a little man here who's asking what, or the fish also has totally no idea what they are doing here. So sometimes visualization can be quite a black box, and yeah, okay, what do we actually mean? Yeah, so here the bear saying a great bear art. Yeah, so let's go to the next one. This is a very nice example here, Niklas, how visualization can be literally translated into words, right? I mean, I think it's very, very easy to see. Here on the one hand, we have the advantages, the happy guy and the grumpy guy, some of the disadvantages. Let's start with the advantages. Here you said one picture can say more than 1,000 words. So visualizations as another advantage, we can do them together, and people from very different backgrounds can work on one visualization, on one vision, on one idea, what they want to develop together. And here we see the world. We see one picture which travels kind of around the world. And here it says 100 kilometers per hour, which stands for speed. So I would interpret that in two ways. On the one hand, maybe you're saying that pictures can travel with very high speed around the world, thus making a lot of impact. Or this also could mean that wherever you go in the world, in very different contexts, pictures are understandable, and it's a common language. I'm not 100% sure. So it's a language that maybe very different groups can understand, has an impact around the world. Yeah, and then on the disadvantages, you showed here the eye and the mouth and the ear shut. So that means, okay, maybe only the visual sense might be not enough to express what we want to express, which is a very important issue. Actually, in PIA we are using visualization, but it's just one element of participatory appraisals or participatory research in general. Actually, there are some of the tools which are not forcibly visualized. Most of them are, but there are some who are not that much visualized. For example, the transect walk is pretty much a tool outside in the world. That's the main part of this method. And sometimes you sometimes do a visualization afterwards, but quite often people also don't do that. So it's really about a combination then in participatory approaches to find the right balance. Here you have the next picture, which shows a small kid and a soldier with a weapon in the hand. And then you have two little persons, one person thinking about the gun and another person thinking about the Red Cross. So I would interpret this part of your visual summary that visuals can be interpreted in very different ways, right? On the one hand, one could say, oh, this guy is having guns and it's very bad. And the other guy could interpret it in a way, oh, this guy came to save the kid from a difficult, harmful situation. Right. So if I interpreted this right, it's a very important element of visualization in PIA. And that's why actually talking, and especially talking about the interpretations, is on a similar level, the very important core element of participatory appraisals. It's not just enough. Actually, the visualization itself is not the goal of PIA. It's the whole process and the talking about it and the analysis of the visualization and the interpretations of the visualizations, which are the main goal of participatory approaches. And that's something which quite often is kind of misunderstood in research and so on. So very important point. And then the last element you have here, okay, what about, we have this small little sheet with some mathematics formula and kind of stuff. So I interpret this like how to visualize complex issues or issues which are not easy to visualize. Yeah. So how to do, what to do with that as part of the challenges for visualization. Yeah. So yeah, very nice one. Here, Oscar, you were also summarizing, I think, most of the stuff which others also said already, and I will come back to some of them later. But for you, I just picked out one point which I find really interesting, that you said here. I interpret this one, okay, on the top you have the advantages of visualization, and on the bottom you have the disadvantages, among others, or it needs time, drawing needs time, and so on. And I think also here how to bring complexity into visual elements, which is a matter of training as well, but also a matter of communication. And here you said, yeah, thinking in stereotypes is actually a disadvantage. Yeah, you are right, and that's a very important and very interesting point, because it's true, right? When we try to find visual elements, we have to kind of break it down. Yeah, we have to break complexity down. And then it's quite difficult to show diversity. There are ways, indeed, to show diversity through visualization, but still you are right. Okay, there is this tendency to use specific stereotypes, especially when it comes to very common icons which are used in visualizations. And yeah, but that's actually one very important point which PRA methods maybe have the advantage in regard compared to other just ways of visualizing. You can visualize in very different contexts, right? That the PRA or the participatory approaches, one of the core principles is not just simply to use these to use these stereotypes, but to talk about them, or to talk about how can we visualize what, how do we draw this map, and do we have all elements inside? Didn't we forget something? So in that moment, actually, there's also a way through visualization to overcome stereotypes and to talk about stereotypes. So yeah, it's a very important and very good point. All right, Giovanna, you came up also with another point. On the one hand, you said, okay, it's that's how I interpret it. It's easy to understand the complex world through visualization. Yeah, so this little girl is drawing and then understands the world. And then there are some boys somehow coming and they're laughing. So you came up with this, okay, somehow it's funny and maybe silly in a way. You also draw the laptop here and saying it's not the same like paper or books and the pencils. So the question is how serious this is as a method. Miriam, you also came up with a similar thing, a very nice summary as well. So you also said, okay, it's very easy to understand, to make some stuff understandable. It's creative and simple. And on the other hand, you said also, oh yeah, but it's maybe a bit childish, unclear, impractical, and misleading. Yeah, and I now totally get this point. Especially at the beginning, I also, when I started learning about PRA, I also always was not sure how people would, especially the participants, how they would react to the plan to draw. And it really depends on the situation and on the groups. And that's a very important point, to find the right level and the right way to visualize, right? There are many different ways to visualize. You can use a normal paper and pen and some colors. That, for example, in some situations, in Bangladesh, for example, some people were not that much used to paper, and then it can be a very strange thing. So paper is not the only way to visualize. So sometimes we even did some matrix scorings on the floor, on the soil. So we used sticks and made a really in the soil we made this tables and the little boxes, and then we used natural material like stones or seeds, wooden sticks to do a matrix scoring and trend analysis. So you can use natural materials in some cases, but you could also use digital ways to visualize, right? You can use satellite images and tablets to visualize. So there are very different ways how to visualize. And so on the one hand, yeah, sometimes it might be kind of childish, but the flip side is also it can be a lot of fun and create a very good mood within a group, and lead thus to a very good research situation, or situation where you talk about issues, where you analyze issues, and so it has these both sides. And yeah, it's indeed very important to think about your research topic, to think about the so-called target group you are working with. So who are your participants? It's very important to think about that first, and then to think, okay, what way is an appropriate way to make a good visualization where it really works and does not lead to this feeling of, oh, that's childish stuff. Yeah, I can just give you one example from my from one of the professors I was working with. He was doing research in Thailand, and he was also doing this very typical PIA with these small cards in different colors. And then one time he went to a group with old women, and then they were like laughing about him and telling him, oh, what are you doing with these colored cards? And do you want to play cards, or do you want to play a game with us? So yeah, it was, for them, it was really funny and strange. And if you have this kind of situations, okay, you know already, okay, you need to be flexible. And maybe in that case, this type of visualization is not the best thing. On the other hand, also, in some cases, you might encounter these first moments where you might think, okay, I'm not sure if that is the right way. But sometimes it's really worth it, nevertheless, to try it, because especially if you come and work with groups who never done something like this before, it always have this moment of being strange. But I would like to encourage you sometimes still to try it, to give it a try first, and then decide whether this way of visualization or another way of visualization is better, because you really need these experiences in order to find a good way. Sometimes you realize, okay, even though the participants were quite skeptical at the very beginning, at the end it turned out to be the perfect way and extremely helpful and insight yielding. So yeah, that's a very important point as well. And then you said impractical. I guess maybe you meant it with regard to with regard to speed. Yeah, because you have to, everybody needs to get the pens and papers or other stuff and need to draw and so on. Yeah, so that would be also a bit related to the question of time, and we'll come to move to that issue later on as well. And you also said misleading. So now if you were in a seminar room, which is unfortunately not possible, it would be very interesting what you mean with misleading, because there's a difference between misleading and being maybe difficult to understand, right? So misleading, I understand in a way that you have a particular intention to mislead someone. You want to fake something, or you want to show something which is not true, and you want to mislead someone, yeah, bring someone in the wrong direction. And that's actually the case, yeah, that can be used everywhere, and visual elements are go very quickly into our minds and control us. Yeah, for sure. That's always possible. But that's also then something we as researchers or as as people who are involved in participatory approaches have to be aware of all these different intentions people might have. And that can be also very interesting insight sometimes, right? How people are visualizing, how the process of finding a common visualization together. I think we will come to that topic also when we look at the summary from Rachel, which she also brought up a very interesting point about visualization. Yeah, Rosa Maria, also nice summary. You pointed out motivation is one of the advantages, and I totally agree with that. If you find a way to explain the method you're going to use, this very often, if, in my experience, led to a very good mood. To people were really motivated to find maybe nice ways to visualize something, to find nice ways to express something, and it can create to all these very nice moments where you think, oh wow, that's a nice nice drawing, or that's a nice way of putting something, and it has a very strong impact on the atmosphere and the situation you're doing research. So that's definitely a very important advantage. You also added quicker learning and remembering. Yeah, that's totally important, especially with regard to keeping an overview. If you do a very long session, these PRA sessions usually they take quite a while. The most, like on average, I would say the sessions I did in Ethiopia, but also in Bangladesh, mostly they took at least 2.5 hours, and maybe sometimes 3 to 4 hours. So they can take quite a long time. And it also helps over the course of the whole sessions to go quick back and or to remember core points and to talk about and switch between them. Furthermore, you talked about fear of drawing, which others also mentioned. That's true. Sometimes we just think, okay, well, I can't draw. But I'm pretty sure once you, as a facilitator, someone who is going somewhere and doing participatory approaches, if you start drawing and your drawing is also not that perfect, the participants will realize, okay, maybe all of us are not that great in drawing, so maybe we are all in the same boat, right? So my drawings are also not perfect at all. If I see some of your visual summaries, I would say, wow, cool, we have some artists among us. We don't need this perfect visualizations. We just need visualizations, and then the content we talk about it. So that's the core part of it. So but it's good to know. This really can happen, and maybe some of you also had the same feelings. Oh my God, now I have to do this visual summary, and I'm not a very good drawer. How do I do it, and so on. So that's something always to keep in mind. So when you do research, that you have in mind a way. This could be a very nice icebreaker as well, right? When you introduce the whole session, when you introduce yourself, to make fun of it a little bit, about maybe your way of drawing or some others. It should be, of course, in a positive way, but it can be also a good way to be an icebreaker. And then you also had this very interesting point, how to express abstract issues, abstractions in a visual way, which is indeed a very big challenge. So that's actually then the advantage of combining not only visualization, but also having other modes, like the verbal mode, talking about the issue. So sometimes you might have elements which are very difficult to draw. What I would do in a situation where in a session you have maybe some keywords or something which is too abstract to visualize, to talk with the group, and then to agree on something which can visualize this abstraction. But the important thing is then you talk about it. Let's say, for example, identity. If yeah, concept of identity is a very complex issue. You could talk for ages about it. Let's say you have a session and then you want to visualize identity. You have no idea how could we visualize it. We will talk in a group and then agree. And it can be any visual sign to use. It could be an I for identity, or an ID for identity, or it could be an ID card for identity. But then you have this card or this visual element, and then you can talk about it, and you can talk about the far more complex background of this. So in this sense, visualization really has to be seen as an elicitation method and really not as a result of participatory approaches. All right, yeah, David, you also pointed out to some of the stuff you have similarly. It's easy to explain some stuff through visual things. And you came up with this question of being scientific versus non-scientific, right? We have this little researcher here on the top, and he's writing a scientific paper, and then, yeah, that's a proof. And here there's another scientist. He only got 2 out of 10 points because he was working, or she was working visually, and then, oh, not approved, right? And that's very often what it is related to. But interestingly, papers having visualizations, having figures and stuff are much more referred to, and yeah, have an extra way to transport and to communicate complex content, right? And also increasingly the scientific journals are asking for visual abstracts. Yeah, so it's true that it seems in the academic world the text is sacred and the most important, but yeah, actually visual elements are also very important and also more and more recognized. And yeah, and I would like to take the fear as well from you guys when you are working with participatory approaches, that others might think, oh, that's not a proper method compared to the semi-structured interview where you sit with your recorder and then you are doing a transcript and using a software and analyze it with MaxQDA or Atlas TI. Actually, no, it's totally the same with PIA. You can also use these visualizations with the coding software and do the same analysis with this. Yeah, so it's a very scientific method, even though sometimes it might not look like this, but actually you can get a lot of more information sometimes compared to classical interviews or semi-structured interviews. And it's very acknowledged. Maybe one very common mistake, which is very often done by students and researchers who are working with PIA for the very first time. I just remember one of the big professors at the University of Bonn, he was always complaining about it, that people tend to digitalize the visualization. So let's say you're going to India and you're making an impact diagram, and then you have these nice cards on the floor and it looks a bit messy whatsoever, and then you take your photograph, and then at the end you go at the computer and you kind of revisualize everything in a digital way. And he was always complaining, saying that that's not the primary source of your method. The primary source is the photograph of your visualization on the floor in this house in India. Yeah, which indeed is true, because when you digitalize this stuff, you could do mistakes, or you can, yeah, the proportions are not the same like during the visualization process and so on. So yeah, there's this whole debate, of course, and yeah, it's true that sometimes you might have the idea that this is not as scientific as other methods, but it's totally accepted in qualitative research methods. Yeah. Okay, and then this is a very interesting input also from Rachel. So I had to look first a bit on this summary, and Rachel, you can please correct me. Maybe you can write a little comment in the forum if I do something wrong. But what I understood from this, from your visual summary, is that okay, here we have one topic. So we have some people who get maybe one question. So the question could be about maybe the environment or something. And so we have one person, she's talking about the tree, and then we have three persons talking about the house. And then we, in a participatory or visualization process, somehow we come together and then we put all our topics on the table. So there are a lot of houses and just one tree. And then at the end, we have to come to one result, right? To one common visualization. And then, yeah, we have to present to the crowd that at the end, we actually talked about houses, because there's only space for this one compromise and for one house. So that's how I interpreted your visualization. And I thought that was a very, very interesting aspect, which the longer I did participatory methods in the past, the more I came to this point that this was some of the really big challenges of participatory research, that visualization is always a compromise, and you have this one common outcome, but during the sessions you had very different perspectives. So I think we should not have the idea that visualization is as a totally democratic way or totally open process. We always have to be aware that the groups with whom we work always question of power and dominance play in a very important role. And that's also why there are some of the principles where we will talk on, later on. I will give you another input on the different principles and aspects. You have to be aware while you are doing participatory research, why we have to kind of integrate them and follow them. But this one point, that at the end there's only one final visualization of the whole process, is something you cannot overcome. And it's a true kind of disadvantage and challenge, and you need to find other ways in how far you can document and integrate all these different perspectives, which might not have the place at the big stage at the end, while this little woman girl is presenting to the crowd the final result. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, all the others also did very nice visual abstracts. I just pointed out some of these. I think we now have pretty much all important aspects of the advantages and challenges of visualization, which I just summarized here. Most of you said, okay, it's more memorable. Yeah, one aspect we also had, it's a common language, and that's something which is very important, especially with regard to those who are doing research in a very different intercultural context. So sometimes you might work with people who cannot read and write, and then visualization has a great power to have a common language, and it can really reduce barriers of education and so on. Yeah, that's one of the really very big strengths of visualization. It makes complexity manageable, or a very important point also. Yeah, when you're doing interviews or focus group, even more with focus group discussions without visualization, we can have a whole lot of information and stuff and complexity, and it's sometimes too much, which is at the end not possible to be kind of processed. And if you have an element of visualization, you can kind of harness all these different information and perspective coming in. So that's one of the big advantages, I would say. It also improves the transparency, right? So if you are having a focus group discussion without visualization, very often it happens that people would go earlier and come back later, or other people just come later to the whole process. And those people are maybe also important for your research. If you have a visualization on the ground, it's very easy to take 3 minutes to summarize what you have been talking about already, and to integrate people who come later into your session. And this is something which actually, especially if you're doing research somewhere in Africa, like some of you are planning to do, or if you're doing research in India, in Thailand, or in many different settings, this really can happen that you're not, maybe it's a very European or Western thing that we are making this kind of date and appointments, and then we book a room for something, and then we go there and all at the same time. That's not what happens in Ethiopia, for example, on the village. Quite often you have people there who do not even have a watch, so they would come according to the sun, and sometimes they have to do something on the fields or something very important, and then they come back later. So for this, it's very good also to have this visualization to show where in the process you are. So it totally improves also the transparency. Everybody can see what you are talking about and what you are doing. As I said, also very important elicitation method. So I think the biggest mistake, what really people are doing, is that the visualization is the main goal, and that the visualization is the main outcome of PIA. It's not true. It's everything which comes around this visualization. It's all the talks about these different visual elements which are very important. So that's why you have to sit there and you have to take notes, and even some are audio recording these sessions, even though I have to say it will be very messy at the end to transcribe them, because it's not that easy to allocate which person said what. So that's why especially note-taking is extremely important, and that's also why in participatory methods you are having different type of roles. You're having the role of the facilitator, the role of the note-taker, and the role of someone who is documenting all the stuff. So in an ideal case, you would have kind of at least 3 person doing sessions together. It's also possible with 2 persons, but doing PIA just alone as 1 person can be very challenging, and you really need to adjust also your different methods. It's also possible, but you need to prepare beforehand a little bit more compared to these bigger teams. So another point, it makes the connections visible. I think I talked about it already. If you're making a normal interview, usually you go from question 1 to question 2 to question 3 and so on. But with a visualized method, you can easily jump back without confusing the people too much, right? If you do that in an interview, that can totally confuse it. Oh, where are we talking about? And it's very different if you, no, I have the question. Oh, before you talked about this problem of, let's say, dry spells in the rainy season. So you can easily jump back. Oh yeah, when you talked about dry spells in the rainy season, and you show on this card, it's much easier for the people to kind of to jump and then talk about the connections, what leads to what, and so on. I said already, it can be a lot of fun and also create this mood of creativity, and it can save time, especially also for the analysis, right? So if you would have done a lot of interviews, and then you have to go through all the transcripts and put in all the codes, it can take a lot of time. But at the end of PIAs, you are having this photograph of your sessions, and this in itself is already a very nice first summary, and it can save time with regard to gaining a quick overview, which does not prevent you from going into detail, of course, but it can save time. All right, on the other side, visualization is not everything. I mentioned it several times now in this talk. it's really important that we also combine it with especially the verbal mode. Yeah, talking about what we are visualizing, what we are meaning by what, and what we are meaning by the connections we are drawing, and so on, is then is key to the whole research approach. And we have to have methods, like additional ways how to document it, and so on. Yeah. Otherwise, there is also a power of the pen. Yeah, those who are having the pen are having also the power what to visualize, like the example from Rachel. Yeah. So and we have to be aware of this power of pen, and kind of make sure that everybody is integrated in this whole process. And sometimes also in a similar way, what Rachel kind of what I interpreted from the picture from Rachel, that this finding a compromise can be quite some frustrating sometimes, right? So maybe you are doing a resource map or a social mapping in a community, and then you have to map out where the biggest problem of the community are, and they can be very different. So maybe there might be some participants, maybe some of the richer people in the village, they have the pen in this moment, or they have to say they have the saying in general. So for them it's much easier than to kind of express and then say, oh, this is the biggest problem in our community. And then there might be some others who are facing really, really deep problems, but those are not the problems that are actually at the moment visualized in this process. And we need to be aware of this, and this can be quite frustrating. So when people sit in these groups and you're doing a session, and then sometimes people are very silent, yeah, it can be a sign of this frustration, or maybe some topics there is an issue right behind. So at least there's this indication, and then you might try to involve them, or you can also, even if you think at the moment, okay, this is maybe sometimes there can be fight right in the sessions. I had that several times, that people started really fighting over issues. It's very important then in that situation to kind of bring that down and bring that back to a good thing. But then it may be also interesting for you as a researcher, maybe then to find another way, not a way within the group, but maybe at the end of the session, you can go to persons where you have the impression, or they had been maybe frustrated with the whole visualization process, and then you can ask them, okay, maybe did you have another perspective on that issue, and you might get some very, very important insights which you would not consider if you would not have asked, or if you would not have had this process of visualization, seeing that this kind of frustration or differences in perspective occur and happen. And that's really something which you only can see through this group methods and visualization methods compared to other typical qualitative research methods. And then the last point is it needs time. So it's a big contradiction, right, between it saves time, it needs time. For sure, it needs time to draw, and sometimes you combine drawing and writing, and you even combine, especially in your cases, when you're working in countries with different languages, and you might not be able to talk all the languages perfectly, so it combines drawing, writing, and translating, which takes a lot of time. But as I said, also, it really depends on what you're looking. At the end, it can save you a lot of time, especially when it comes to the analysis, and also when it comes with the cross-checking of interpretations and analysis with the participants. And then it can be a time saver. On the other hand, you have to invest that time in order to make this whole sessions. So compared maybe to some interviews, which you could do within 1.5 hours, PA sessions are always much longer. And that's another point where you have to find a good motivation that people really take this time to spend with you and share their insights with you. So that's a very important thing. So in the last, that's the last slides, I would like to compare a bit these different modes. On the one hand, the verbal mode, which are these typical interviews or conversations, can be also informal talks. compared to the visual mode, vision research modes, like doing mapping diagrams and matrices. Yeah. So what are like the differences between those modes? Yeah. So the outsider mode or the researcher, in the case of the verbal mode, are pretty much like a probing investigator. We are going there and then we're having our questions and we sit with someone and then, okay, we ask this question and that's it. But doing visualization, the outsider or the researcher is really like an facilitator or initiator. But the whole process is done by the participants, by the group whose task it is to do this visualization. So the insider's mode, or what is the mode of the participants, in the verbal research mode, it's pretty much a reactive respondent to the questions. And for the visual mode, they are more creative and analysts and presenters, right? Because we are giving kind of the topic, and then they have this task of doing this visualization, and then at the end they have to explain or present their visualization. So that's this element of presenting and also analyzing, for example, the problems, or depending on what topic you are working on. Yeah, what is the investigative style? For the verbal, this is actually all content from Robert Chambers. Here he said, yeah, the verbal is very extractive and the visual is much more performative. And yeah, for the visual, it's really the whole process of the visualization which is important. Then the question, the insider's awareness of the outsider, so and how far the people we are doing research with, the participants, kind of realize that we as a researcher are there. So when we are doing an interview, yeah, it's very high. We're sitting in front of each other and the researcher is raising these questions and we are very present. But in PIA sessions or with this visual mode, it's much more of an exchange also between the participants, because they're talking about, oh, how do we visualize this, or where is this resource, or how are we going to, or what destinations for mobility mapping are important, and so on. So they're talking a lot with each other, and this puts us as researchers or as facilitators a bit more into kind of an outside position, not being that present. Eye contact with verbal is very high, and again with visual is very low. So sometimes you would go around and people are doing the visual stuff in the middle, and so you're not having this very intense kind of sitting in front of each other and now we have to talk about your life and all your problems and whatsoever. It can lead to a very good atmosphere if you're having these group situations where even sometimes difficult issues are easier to talk about rather than just sitting with this one researcher and one translator or interpreter. And then like everybody's just focusing on you. This can be a very kind of situation of strong focus, which not for everybody is the best suitable way. But on the other hand, talking about sensitive issues in a group can be also difficult. So it always have this advantages, disadvantages. It really depends a bit also on the situation. Yeah, what materials are used? What is the medium for research? In the verbal mode, it's pretty much the material from the outsider. Usually we bring our audio records or our questionnaire sheets, and then our pens and drawing and whatsoever. And the visual mode can include it, but it really depends also on how you're planning this process. Can include the material from the insiders. You can ask about different materials to use, but this is not always the case. We have to say that very often people working with PIA are bringing this typical PIA boxes with the different cards and pens and so on, and then we have to be clear that this is also outside material, right? So I would not agree with all these aspects of Robert Chambers. Yeah, the next level would be details influenced by. So in the verbal mode, especially like if you ask about details, it's pretty much the ethic categories, yeah, the categories from the outsider, the outsider's view. If we ask something and we don't understand something, usually it's linked to our perceptions and our categories we are having in mind. And then we are trying to verify, oh, there maybe it's that and that, and then we can explain the word easily. And that's quite different also for the visual process, because the visual process always needs some clarifying when you are talking about different ways how to visualize what, or where, in which distance to put what. It depends now again on the method you're doing. It's different from diagrams or Venn diagrams or mappings. But pretty much it's emic categories, right? So it's the categories of the participants and not the categories of the researchers or the outsiders, which count. The information flow, yeah, for the verbal mode is sequential, right? You start from the first question and go down to the next questions. Of course, there you can also jump a bit, but it would be the more you jump, the more confusing it is. And for the visual mode, it's cumulative. So of course you would also have some element of sequence. Usually in these methods there are step 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. But it's much easier to add later on, or at a later stage when you realize, okay, in stage 2 we forget something. It's very easy to add without creating too much confusion. Okay, the next point, accessibility and information to others. And the verbal mode is pretty low and transient. It really depends on how much then the researchers are sharing, and if it's really kind of usable for the participants, right? Because you're having this record, and usually you would not give the record, of you could, but the question is how much does it really give back to the people if you just give the record or the transcripts. Usually, I don't know, I've never seen anyone at the end really doing it. Sometimes maybe people give out the reports or something, but still you have to question. It really depends a bit on the situation also and where you are doing research. But let's say you're doing research with an ethnic group in Kenya, and then you're doing research and at the end you bring your research report. It's still a very important symbolic gesture of sharing, but we cannot expect that people who might be illiterate are really able then to do something with these information, right? And that's quite different with visual things, right? So it's visible for everyone. And for example, in our project in Thailand, we were doing this village maps, and these maps were highly demanded by the village heads, but also other people from the village. And so at the end, we had these maps, and you can have different ways of mappings, of course. And that's a very great way also to, at the end, you can lead the visualization with the community. Of course, you have to take your photograph, so you will be able to analyze and still have your data also for your writing and your projects. But it's much easier to share the information, and it's much easier for many people to understand this kind of information because it is visual and it does not have these barriers of language and different languages and writing for people who are not able to read and write. It's much easier to read and kind of understand the visual text. But sure, also here there are challenges like all the time. Also here we should not expect a perfect world of sharing of knowledge. So that's why also the whole process of doing research visually is quite important. Yeah, so Chambers also had this level of initiative of cross-checking. Who is cross-checking? Who is asking if something is not clear? In verbal interviews, usually it's the outsider. And it's true that for visual, it's both. It's the insider and the outsider. Of course, we can, as researchers, we can always cross-check during the PIA sessions. But what really happens very often is that also the participants cross-check among each other. I had this so many times when we were asking questions like, oh, okay, for example, where are water resources for your agricultural system? And then some people said, yeah, there's here, we did the mapping about this. Oh, there's this this pond, or there's the well, there's a stream, and so on. And then sometimes even people were not aware that, okay, where is it? Oh yeah, okay. And so sometimes you have this this information which not everybody knows within the group, which is shared, and this cross-checking also, or how did you mean that, pretty much happens when you're doing visual research. I have to say that this kind of level depends a lot also on where you are doing research, right? If you're doing research in a country where you are not able to speak that language, it can be also quite difficult for you as foreigner to understand this level of cross-checking and conversation, because you, even if you have a very good translator, interpreter, it can be very messy, a lot of people talking at the same time, and you won't get all these details. So yeah, it depends a bit also on the situation, compared if you're doing this with a group of the same language, which makes it much easier. All right, so the ownership of the information. Yeah, if you're doing verbal research, it's pretty much contained by the researcher. We are doing our records, audio records, and going home, and we own that stuff. And the visual mode would be pretty much a shared understanding of information. But of course, at the end, you only have one visualization. So the question is also who has this, who gets this. Very often also the researchers take it, or they leave it in a community center, or with the village heads, or with the other actors. But then, yeah, we have to be a bit careful also with this sharing thing. It sounds very nice, but it's not always practical as well. Okay, and the last one, the utility of complex analysis, or for complex analysis. The verbal utility is from low to high. Chambers just said low, but I disagree with that, because also when doing semi-structured interviews or narrative interviews or oral history, you can have a lot of layers, and this can get can go on very long, and you can have a lot of complex issues also within that. So that's the point where I disagree with Chambers. But it's true also doing research with visual methods. Yeah, you can create a lot of interlinkages between the different topics. You can talk about all these different aspects, and yeah, so it's very helpful for understanding complex issues, and to kind of, as you also said in your visual summaries, yeah, to make sense out of it. All right, so that's it with regard to the visualization. Yeah, so thank you very much for listening, and see you in the next video with, yeah, I have to stop this one and then stop recording. Yeah, so see you.